Hi, and welcome to Enriched Perspective with Mike and Talisha Wallace, where we seek to shift paradigms through the exploration of biblical principles. I'm Mike.
And I'm Talisha.
Welcome to
the
the
podcast. So today's topic is about relationships and how they can change over time. Sometimes we can get caught up in the nostalgia of what was instead of dealing with the realities of what is. We're going to be using King David for inspiration, as well as a book by Van Moody entitled The People Factor. But first, let's talk a little bit about King David. Mike, how does King David fit into this conversation?
So, King David, we're back at him yet again, yet another story, talking about his life and his escapades and exploits. At any rate, King David had another situation, of course, in his life where he had a relationship. The relationship that we're talking about is the one with his first wife, Michal, who was the daughter of Saul. At the beginning, after David had been anointed king, and we move up to David now was at his Saul's house, and he was by his side. He was an armor bearer, and David was beginning to become despised by Saul. As a plot or a ploy to get rid of David, Saul had decided to kind of trick him in a sense from the perspective of, I'll give you my daughter, but in order for you to have her, because I know you're poor and you don't have a lot, all I ask of you is 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And David, because he understood the honor that was being bestowed on him by his king in offering him being a shepherd boy at the hand of the daughter, her being a princess, he was more than happy to oblige. In this particular case, Michal actually loved David as well. She was a great fan of his. She really admired him, and she cared deeply for him. So it was a win-win as far as they were concerned, but Saul, not so much. So the story moves on, and of course, David went and he killed the Philistines, and he brought back the foreskins, and Saul had to be true to his word, so he did give David Michal, and eventually, again, Saul was upset. He got angry. A spirit of vexation came upon him again, and he wanted to kill David. He wanted to actually assassinate him in the night. Michal got wind of it, and she spared David's life by letting him out of the room through the window, let him down off to the side, and he fled. And she also put a dummy, so to speak, in the bed with her so that they couldn't recognize whether he had left or not. And she kind of said he was sick, so she gave him enough time to be able to kind of get a head start. So David was gone. Here she was alone. Saul got mad again, and later on he actually gave her, Michal, to someone else to be their wife. David was out, running for his life, from pillar to post, city to city, den to cave. And over the course of time, he had gotten 2 wives. He got Ahinoam, and he also got Abigail as well, had children. And, he went through the Ziklag experience, as we talked about before, and then he became king. And at first, he was only king of a portion of Israel. And eventually, there was a situation that rose between Abner and the last remaining son of Saul. And Abner got upset, and he was going to turn the full kingdom over into David's hands. And David said, I will not accept unless you give me my wife back, Michal. So Abner went and got her back from her husband, and brought her back to David. And then David was established as the king of all Israel, all the 12 tribes. Mm-hmm. Well, later down the line, of course, if you know the story, there was a story about the Ark of the Covenant being in the Philistines' camp and being brought back to Israel. In that story, of course, there was an incident that occurred, and they left the Ark of the Covenant at Obed-Edom's house. But then they finally, got an opportunity. They went back to retrieve it and bring it back to where it rightfully belonged. Mm-hmm. During that transition or that carriage of the ark back into where it was rightly supposed to belong, David got, of course, excited, and he was worshiping and praising and magnifying God. And Michal saw him out the window, and she had an issue with how he was praising the Lord. Mm-hmm. She couldn't wait. Right after he was done and after he was coming back into the house, she immediately reproved him, or she rebuked him and called him or accused him of acting as if he was a lewd man, and just really was kind of belittling him for his actions or his display of gratitude and thanks unto the Lord through his praise.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, David ended up saying what he had to say, and then she ended up being cursed.
Mm.
And it says in that same part of the Bible, it's like she had contempt in her heart for him. So where we see at the beginning, when they first came together, there was love, there was admiration, there was respect. And now we get to the second phase of the relationship, and she had contempt, which was manifested through how she ended up approaching him after, she saw him praising the Lord.
So it sounds to me like there was a lot of changes during this separation. They both were have different experiences, different growths and development, that when they came back together, they were not as they once was.
Not by any means.
No.
Of course, she was given to someone else to marry.
Mm-hmm.
So she was going in a different direction. I'm not going to say it was by choice, but
Right.
she was in a different direction. And of course, David was fleeing for his life, and he was relegated to a kind of life of a rebel and a renegade, so to speak. And again, it wasn't by choice, it was by circumstance that he was living a different life as well. And they were, to your point, separated. And a lot of things had happened. A lot of things which Michal didn't experience with David.
So even as it relates to us today, relationships are relationships, even though we're talking about people that are like ancient. It's still a relationship that we can pull from lessons from how they related and dealt with each other in a sense of change. I don't know if you could say that David handled it correctly. Coming back together since the separation, you could tell immediately that they were not on the same page anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that, of course, the Bible doesn't really give a lot of detail
Right.
as far as how they were feeling or their emotions or even the motives behind, why David, chose to go and retrieve her.
Right.
He already had 2 other wives.
Yeah.
He already had kids and everything. So you would have thought that he had moved on, and you would have thought that she had moved on as well. But evidently there was something there. There was a desire for him or in him to want to bring her back.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he wouldn't have made that a stipulation for him, being put over all Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a pretty big step to say, I'm not going to do it unless you give me back, my first wife. Unless you felt some kind of way, most of us wouldn't have done that. We would just be like, you know what, we good.
Yeah.
Let's keep it moving.
Yeah. What we were saying in the introduction, we think things are going to be the same, thinking it's going to be just how it was when we first started. Everything is going to be perfect. You're going to be in love with me, spare your life for me. Like he probably was expecting that type of adoration from her. And it wasn't like that anymore. She wasn't that same girl.
Yeah, she wasn't that same ride or die chick that she was at the beginning.
Right. But we're talking about changes. It can happen in a relationship.
You can't really fault her because, again, she probably didn't even know if he was alive or not.
Yeah.
And she probably didn't assume that he was going to come and get her.
Yeah.
Now, there's all kinds of folklore and, wise fables and things like that talks about the situation. But according to the Bible, it really, again, there's not a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of assuming on our parts as far as how she felt, how he felt during the time of separation.
Yeah.
But one thing we do know, to your point, that there was change.
Yeah.
Like I say, she went from having one husband to now a second husband. David went from having one wife to having 2 other wives.
Oh, yeah.
And not only wives, but children.
Mm-hmm.
Like with Michal, he didn't have any kids. So when they came back together, it was a completely different dynamic. There was a completely different set of experiences that they've had apart.
Right.
And now you're trying to come back together and act as if none of that ever happened.
Yeah.
As if it doesn't impact or have any bearings on how we're going to relate to each other now.
Yeah. So do you think that it's fair to expect the same thing from each other in relationships after a certain separation or just even over a matter of time?
Absolutely not. To expect exactly what you got at the beginning is to assume that a person doesn't grow.
Right.
They don't evolve. They don't learn. That's a ridiculous assumption to make of anyone.
Yeah.
Caught me at 21 and you catch me at 42. I'm not the same person that I was.
Right.
And if you choose to treat me from a relational standpoint like I was when I was 21, you're going to get a different response.
Yeah, just with that in mind, we have all different types of relationships, like parent, child, spouses, siblings, jobs, relationships with yourself. I mean, as far as like how you see yourself, nothing weird or crazy.
Okay, just check it.
No, I mean like you should be growing more into taking care of yourself, loving yourself more. That type of like how you see yourself, what you think of yourself in that sense. Nothing goofy.
Yeah.
But there's all different types of relationships is what I'm trying to say. Like uh, now he's looking
Doing a
at me
good job
funny.
there.
I'm backpedaling, y'all. I'm backpedaling. But anyway, you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. Like all relationships have moments where each person involved should be evolving or changing or growing, and you shouldn't get upset about that. I don't expect our kids to be like they were when they were in diapers and teething or couldn't talk, couldn't walk. You know, I would think there would be, unless they have some kind of special needs or something. You know, I'm expecting to see some growth and maturity. Changes happen.
Yeah, but for some reason though, I think we assume when we get to a certain age, all of that stops.
Yeah.
I believe we all are guilty at times of taking for granted the fact that people do grow,
Yeah.
people do mature, experiences do shape how you view the world. When you're young, of course, you don't have a lot of experience in certain areas of life, so you sometimes have a very bubblegum lollipop view of the world, and what it has to offer and what's possible. But as you grow up and as you mature, as you go through different things, it can either give you a keener, sense of purpose and have you focused, understanding the obstacles, or it can cause you to become jaded.
Yeah.
You can get resentful and you can get bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're dealing with a person that has been through this transformation, whether it be from a positive perspective or even a negative perspective, as if they haven't went through anything and as if they haven't, had those experiences, you're going to be in for a surprise.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
I believe sometimes we just choose to turn a deaf ear and a blind eye, to people when they try to express to us that they are not who you might think they are,
Yeah.
or who you expected them to be. They're not that person from 10, 15, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They have grown, they have matured, and we won't allow them to come out of what was,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where we were comfortable with them. That's where, we felt good. We didn't feel intimidated. We didn't feel uneasy or uncomfortable. We knew how to handle them. We had a certain amount of control
Yeah.
in that relationship and in that particular moment of that relationship. But as people grow, mature, like you said, they come into their own, they begin to understand and know their own self-worth.
Yeah.
So they're not so willing to just take any and everything that sometimes we give to people.
Right.
They've set some boundaries in their lives, and sometimes, early days we probably wasn't respecting those boundaries. We were kind of just trampling over them, and and they just kind of relented.
Mm-hmm.
But now that they've grown up, they matured, they got some backbone. Now they're not so willing to allow you to just trample over them, and now they're speaking up for themselves. And first thing, you done changed.
Yep. You changed.
Something different about
You
you.
acting all funny.
Right. And yeah, I have changed.
Right.
Yes, I am acting funny if you're comparing me to who I was way back when.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've been watching me, if you've been observing me, if you've been, taking the time to really be attentive
Mm-hmm.
and communicating with me, you would know that I really have changed for the better.
Right.
I've grown up.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier about this. One of the points you had made was find me where I am and not when I was.
Right. Because in David's situation, like I say, I'm speculating here. Like I said, he probably was thinking about the relationship that him and Michal had.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, she loved him, she cared for him to the point where she was really, really putting her own life at risk by sparing his.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't think twice about it. And now here it is. He's went through his trauma, his trials, and now he's on the other side of things, and he's about to experience, the fulfillment of that promise. And he probably wanted to bring her along for the ride. But
Yeah.
the problem was she didn't necessarily grow in the same way that he grew.
Right.
It's not that she didn't grow, but not in the same way he did,
Right.
because she wasn't there. She was
Right.
still at home in the palace
Mm-hmm.
while he was sleeping in caves. She was still at home in the palace while he was running through the forest and running from city to city, just to make sure he stayed alive.
Right.
She was still in the palace when his family was taken, in Ziklag,
Mm-hmm.
when everybody, wife, children, everything was taken away
Right.
from him in a moment. She was still in the palace, so she didn't have those experiences to pull from. So she couldn't really understand David
Right.
in this moment.
Yeah. And just even his relationship that he had with God. She
Correct.
wasn't around him enough to sense that, see why he was so passionate and why was he dancing like that.
The gratitude she couldn't understand because again she was in the palace.
Right.
So I mean, to see someone of his stature now, I mean, and she had been in the presence of a king because her father was a king,
Mm-hmm.
and Saul didn't behave like that. He probably was very reserved and very calm and collected in front of the people.
Mm-hmm.
But here he is, you have now the new king, and he acted some kind of way that I'm not accustomed to.
Yeah.
And in her mind, she probably felt like he was embarrassing himself.
Mm-hmm.
And not only himself, but her as well, because she's the queen or one of the queens, or however you want to call it. She was one of the many,
That's right.
and she felt compelled to speak her piece in her mind, not understanding, to your point, that this was coming from a place of purity,
Right.
and it was gratitude that he was expressing. And everybody that's been with him through this change and these transformations that he's been going through, they understood.
Right.
They didn't have a problem with it.
Right.
But because she wasn't there and she kind of coming back in on the latter end, she had a problem with it.
Mm-hmm. So this new normal, we heard that term a lot lately. New normal.
Yeah, new normal is something that we all have to grasp. And it's hard. It's a challenge because, again, those things, how things were.
Mm-hmm.
When you think, let's go back to the kids, for example.
Yes.
You can say when your kids were little, as we can attest to,
Mm-hmm.
like I say, you had a lot of control.
Yes.
You managed, when they ate, when they went to bed, when they bathed, where they went, everything was kind of under your care and control.
Right.
You put them in different things, and when you decided to, you could take them out.
Mm-hmm.
But as they grew older, you had to learn that now the dynamics of this relationship is starting to change.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have to have some control over different areas and aspects of their lives.
Right.
And if I'm still trying to treat them like the 5 and 6 year old, then I'm going to be really stunting their growth.
Right.
And if I'm not stunting their growth, I'm going to cause them to become resentful,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to be bitter because they're going to feel like you're an adversary instead of an advocate.
Yes. Yes.
And if, again, and as a parent, it's sometimes difficult to accept the changes and the transformations that children are going through.
Mm-hmm.
There's a, toddler stage or baby toddler, then it's that tween,
Oh yeah.
then it's the teenage years, and then it's you getting to the young adult age, and we sometimes have difficulty letting go.
Yeah.
And accepting and respecting where they are right now. Because we still think of them as my little schnookums
That's
or
my baby.
my baby. And quite frankly, your baby is big and rusty,
Ashy.
grown. You're still trying to treat him or her like they're a 5-year-old or a
Yeah.
6-year-old, trying to clean up all their messes, trying to be everything for them. And they really don't even want it.
No.
They're trying to go and live and, take control of their lives and become independent. And we
Mhm.
keep holding them back because we can't accept where we are,
Yeah. Because you want what was.
because it's easier.
Oh yeah.
It's much easier for me to just tell you.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much easier for me to just make you do it than it
Right.
is for me to relinquish control and give you the space to be able to make those adult decisions
Yeah.
on your own. And like I say, I'm going through it right now.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
half and half, and it's a challenge sometimes because sometimes it's like, oh,
Yeah. You just have to step back and take your hands off, let them bust their head,
True.
learn from their mistakes. As much as you want to jump in and say, no, don't do that, or let me clean that up for you. Like, nope, you got to feel it.
no. And you have to trust the teaching
Yeah.
that you've done, and you have to trust the example that you've set. Hopefully you set a good example,
Right.
that it'll kick in. It might not kick in right away,
Yeah.
but you have to trust that somewhere down the line, it's going to kick in, and it's going to help them be able to be successful in navigating life as an adult, because that's the biggest thing. We're just afraid. We
Yeah.
don't want them to fail.
Right.
We don't want them to be hurt. We don't want them to have any setbacks or losses. We want them to have, that beautiful future where everything just goes right, but that's not reality.
No,
And
not at all.
they're willing to accept that, but we're not.
Yeah.
So sometimes we keep trying to pull them back into a relationship similar to what was, instead of
Right.
really respecting where we are and what is right now. So that's the kids.
Yeah, I was thinking too. Okay, so David and his first wife, they got separated not by choice.
Correct.
Then I think about like in relationships as it goes with spouses. If you're not like in a divorce or like a legal separation or anything, you're still living and growing together in the same house.
True.
Is there a possibility that there could be a separation in that relationship, or a disconnect where you not paying attention to your spouse, and you look up years from now and say, hey, who are you? You're a stranger to me, even though you've been in the same house. You didn't physically separate, but there have been changes going on.
True. I think that's definitely true nowadays. I think it's always been true. When you look back in times gone by where you had kind of the husband working outside the home and the mother really being a homemaker and being in the home, being with the children. I think during those times it was a challenge to stay connected because, again, husbands are outside of the home. They're working sometimes long hours. And the wife is really, focused and really wholly engrossed in trying to raise and teach and train and, keep the kids moving forward. In those situations, years go by, the mother is fully committed to the children and their development and their success. And the husband is fully committed to his career, and climb up the ladder so he can provide and support his household. You get to, like you said, 15 years down the line, your kids are now grown. They are making these transitions.
Right.
Now, they don't need you like that anymore. And sometimes mothers don't know who they are,
Right.
or they have evolved into something different than what they was at the beginning. And fathers, they don't know who she is either.
Yeah.
And because she's not the woman that I married, and not necessarily in a positive sense. Maybe she has, become more used to being independent. Maybe she's
Right.
become, even bitter because you weren't there, and maybe she's truly just grown apart and she's just really been dealing with you because you are the provider.
Yeah.
And now we're at the situation where I don't need you for that anymore.
Right.
And now I'm ready to move on and live my life.
Oh.
And it's funny how, like, what in the world happened?
Yeah.
It's like, I thought you were happy. I thought we were good. And you lost track. You didn't take the time necessary to stay connected.
Yeah.
And now whatever you thought was, that's not what is anymore.
No.
And now you see them having to go through therapy and different things to try to bring each other back to a common ground of understanding.
Yes.
Because whatever we thought we understood, that's not our truth anymore.
Right.
And go ahead.
I don't think that evolution or growing is a bad thing. I think we talked about that too, like not to fight each other because you've changed. It actually could be a beautiful thing, rediscovering each other in a different way.
True. But that was back then. Now, when you look at today, where you have typically both parents working outside the home, both parents having very demanding careers in a lot of cases, it's even more challenging to stay connected. And if you're not careful, you'll look up in a shorter time frame and realize, like, you're so far to the left and to the right of each other. Why are we still together?
Yeah.
And if you really, don't have that true love for one another, it'd be easy to separate. It'd be easy to divorce because they say irreconcilable differences. It's not always because of adultery that people divorce. A lot of times it's just we've just lost connection.
Right.
I don't know who this person is anymore. I don't share the same values. I don't share the same vision and dreams for my future. I don't really support him. He doesn't really support me. And why are we together?
Yeah.
And at the beginning, I mean, you all had the plan. You sat
Mhm.
down and you dreamed, and you visioned together.
Yeah.
Wrote out your future, how many kids, house, so forth and so on. And
Mhm.
you started on the path of trying to make that a reality. And somewhere along the way, you allow different things to become distractions to,
Right.
nurturing the relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, you're making the money. Yes, you're getting the prestige. Yes, you're accumulating the things, but we lose sight of what's important,
Mhm.
and we allow the relationship to suffer.
Yeah.
And it suffers because we stop taking the time necessary to stay connected enough till we always know what is.
Right. And there should be a bottom line of what that is.
Absolutely.
So how do we respond to change? Some people may walk away. They don't want to put the effort into they don't want to put the effort into what it takes to keep that relationship burning. Some just say we're going to do whatever it takes, like you were saying, like counseling and communication. So what are some ways we could do to keep it going?
I think you mentioned them all.
I think I did, didn't I? Let's see. Walk away or stay. Communicate. Relearning each other. And spending more time with each other. That helps with
Yeah.
keeping.
I think also just having respect for one another. And it's not necessarily just throwing away what was,
Mm-hmm.
because what was is sometimes what gives you the energy and the fuel to be able to want to rediscover what is.
Yeah.
So if we had a loving relationship, if we had, good fellowship and communion, that helps me at least know that it's possible.
Yeah.
If I loved you before, it's possible for me to love you again.
Yeah.
Now, you have to be careful, because sometimes there can be some things in there that can alter that relationship forever.
Oh.
Like you say, you talk about infidelity. When you talk about adultery, the Bible
Abuse.
says is a mark and a scar you'll get. And like I say, it'll never go away. That's something that'll always be there, and it's something that you're going to always have to deal with, because you have truly breached not only a natural but a spiritual agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have to deal with the realities of where that relationship is.
Right.
And you can't complain. Like I say, well, they don't treat me like they used to. I don't know how you expect them to.
Right.
you
You broke the covenant.
Exactly, and you're really starting from ground zero, actually
Yeah.
at a deficit,
Mm-hmm.
because when somebody gives you everything that they have, and you betray that, you have to take responsibility and own the fact that there will be a difference.
Right.
And your goal, your aim, your motive has to be trying to find a way to mend, to heal, to move forward, not from the perspective of forget it, don't think about it, wipe your mouth,
Yeah.
move on, but from a point of repentance and a point of remorse, because you know that this was hurtful, this was a painful thing that you done to this individual,
Right.
and you have to accept. Again, this is where we are. Sometimes they always say she, but guys get cheated on too.
True.
They're going to be upset. There's going to be days where they're going to have some flashbacks. They're going to have some memories, and you have to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to give them their space to be upset.
Yeah.
You have to be understanding of the fact that sometimes it just ain't going to be a good day.
Yeah.
And own it.
Yeah.
And again, with humility, ride through it.
Mm-hmm.
Have patience, because, again, you need a lot of mercy.
Right.
And now we keep it moving, and we can rebuild from where we are today.
Right.
Yes, we have great memories. We got some things. We have some bad memories. But
Mhm.
now, where we are today, we can build.
Right.
We can move, and it never is too late to start.
Right. And another point you had made was be aware of the shift in yourself and in the other party in the relationships. Like, pay attention. Be aware. Don't just, just in and out, day in, day out, and just expect everybody just to be the same. Whatever. Pay attention.
Yeah, I think we as men, I'm speaking for myself, we can be guilty of that, because, like I say, you just get caught up in doing what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You get caught up in handling your responsibilities, and sometimes you can go on autopilot and feel like that's sufficient. I'm paying the bills. I'm bringing home the money. I'm I'm present to an extent. I'm here. I participate. But we got to go a step further than that. We really have to plug in. We have to be willing to ask sometimes those very difficult questions of ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and also of our companions and of our children. Real talk. How do you feel about me?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how I feel about you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I've been dealing with? Do you know what's going on in my mind? Do you know, when was the last time we sat down and really talked about where we would like to go as a family?
Right.
Not as individuals, but as a family.
Mm-hmm.
When was the last time we really took the time to listen to each other and really take in how you feel and what you're thinking and how you now perceive the world after we have lived a little?
Yes.
We just don't do that at times, and we just keep piling it on,
Mm-hmm.
and then we look up. Like say we get to the point where we're at, where our kids are,
Mm-hmm.
almost grown and gone,
Right.
and God forbid, it'd be like, well, that was the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be 25 years by the time our youngest will be ready to graduate from high school. But some
Right.
people are like, okay, we're done.
I've heard stories like that. Kids grow out, leave, and parents get divorced.
And kids be like, finally.
But it's like, what happened? You were together for over 20 plus years, and now you get a divorce just like it's nothing. Like, well, we just grew apart.
Right.
Like, oh, wow.
And it
We
happens.
were just together for the kids.
Why though?
Right.
And that's the part that, like I say, we have to keep readdressing in ourselves. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why am I here?
Yeah.
What am I what am I looking for? But also, what am I willing to give?
Yeah.
And make sure that you're aligned, because you can get to that what was real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Like say you can get into a good spot in your life, your relationship, and everything related to that, you want it to stay right there.
Mm-hmm.
Like some people never leave high school.
Oh, yeah.
It's like in their mind, everybody is still like they was in high school. They still approach everything in life like it's high school, and others around them have moved on.
Mm-hmm.
But for them, that was the best time of their life, and they don't want to leave that moment.
Right.
But that's not reality.
No.
Like I say, you might not want to leave it, but everybody else is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And you wonder why people don't want to deal with you. People don't want to, want to talk to you, because you're still stuck in a time warp,
Yeah.
and you still behaving like a high schooler. And I'm 40 some years old, got grandkids,
Right.
and we still doing stuff like we was in high school.
No.
Oh, come on now.
That's not
It's
gonna
like,
work.
we can't be. We gotta come on. We gotta grow up.
Yeah.
We're men. We're women, and we gotta speak and act like that.
Exactly.
Put away those childish things.
That's right. The Bible say, when I became a man, I put away childish things.
True. And kind of steeping over into the friendships, like
Mhm.
thinking about all the different mediums now by which you can go back and find people in your past.
Mhm.
Like say you have Facebook, you have Twitter, can help, Instagram. You have all these, LinkedIn even, all
Mhm.
these different ways and modes to be able to reconnect with your past.
Yeah.
And sometimes we pull people from our past that need to stay where they are.
Right.
Because who they are today is like, that's not conducive to who you are today.
Mhm.
And then there's some people you can bring forward, but you also have to do it with understanding.
Mhm.
Because again, it might have been 10, 15, 20 years since you all have had any meaningful interaction.
Right.
And you have to understand that they are not who they were when you left them.
Yes, that is so true. Now, that kind of brings me into what I've been reading about in this book, The People Factor by Van Moody. He talks a lot about relationships. It's a really good book. I highly recommend that. If you can get your hands on this, get your hands on it and read it and apply the wisdom to your life. And he talks about when friends, like as you mentioned before, started off good. Relationship was
Mhm.
great. Everything was good. But then somewhere along the lines, life happened, or one friend went a different way because they were called by God to do something that may not have been in the other friend's best interest, or like you were saying earlier, one friend was using the other friend to get what they wanted from them, and then the other friend woke up to what they were doing and set some
Mhm.
boundaries, and they lose a friend. And there's all kinds of different situations that cause for friends to sometimes separate, and he calls it like it's just a constructive transition
Mhm.
or is where you break up or you have to separate, go different ways. But it doesn't mean you end the friendship, but it's like you have to change the dynamics of that relationship. It's no longer you my best friend, ride or die, because I don't do what you do anymore. Especially those that have crossed over to living for God. You
True.
can't hang out with the friends that you were doing your dirt with and think it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be all good. And when you're trying to do what God has for you to do, you can't live in the past like that, and that could cause some shifting in the relationships as with your friends or past loved ones for that matter.
True.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges that you have sometimes when you do cross over into salvation.
Mhm.
When you come into this new life in Christ, because people are so used to who you was, and they just automatically expect you to behave as such,
Right.
they really don't know how to deal with you
Mhm.
in your new state. Like I say,
Right.
you're a new creature in Christ, and those things that you used to do, those things that you used to find pleasure in, even, you don't do that anymore. You don't go after the same righteousness,
Mhm.
and they don't know how to deal with you because they're like, well, you used to be fun, or
Mhm.
you used to do this, you used to do that, and you find yourself constantly having to re-explain, why you don't do what you used to do,
Right.
and at times a separation is required,
Yeah.
or at least a redefining of the relationship is
Mhm.
required, because I can't be that same person that you remember. I'm
Right.
someone else now,
Yeah.
and if I try to be that person, then I'm going to put myself in jeopardy from a salvation standpoint.
Yeah. And also in the book, he gives like 5 points to look for to see if you should be considering that constructive transition or switching the dynamics of your friendship. And one of them that I liked was you have to realize that everyone cannot see it and understand as you do. Like
True.
your perspective has changed, your desires have changed. Like David was all in worshiping the Lord, just really going all in, hoping maybe his wife would see. Maybe he thought she would come join him or something, but it was quite the opposite.
True.
So sometimes you have to recognize that everybody's not going to be on the same page as you. You have to be okay with that. And then another point he said was knowing that building blocks, so those same friends that maybe have helped you in the past can now become your stumbling block. So that's another moment you might have to realize if you're trying to do something, you're trying to persevere, you're trying to obey God, and this person is in your way, you might have to separate for a while and say, hey, you got to get out my way. I'm on the plan. I got to do what I'm destined to do, and you are blocking me now. You're no longer a benefit to me in this area. And so that all comes with changes in relationships.
True.
Yeah. So I found that very interesting. I never thought about it that way. Like somebody that helped me all these years now can actually be hindering me.
Definitely.
Wow.
I think we were talking about that from a organizational standpoint too. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about business, sometimes you can hire someone and you see their potential,
Yeah.
and you do a lot to coach and mentor and help bring that potential to fruition. But when it's time for them to leave, you have a hard time letting them go.
Oh yeah.
And if you're not careful, like I say, you can be a hindrance and a blocker to their progress,
True.
knowing that they have greater potential, greater capability, and maybe they will succeed you. And instead of, appreciating them and loving them and supporting them, you find yourself trying to hold them in what you are comfortable with
Mm-hmm.
and what benefits you the most,
Right.
instead of dealing with where they are now. If they've outgrown something, you have to be willing to let
Yeah.
them go.
Yeah, and that's the same way like we were saying, parents and children.
Absolutely.
It's like, okay, you've shown that you're ready to go off to college or you're ready to move out or do whatever. And no, I don't agree with that. I don't feel that. I'm not, but if it's time, it's just time, and we have to learn to let them go,
True.
and do what they were meant to do.
And
Another point he made was understand that people usually have positive motives. They mean well. It's for your protection. It's for your benefit that I'm saying this. I don't want you to get hurt. I want to protect you. So some people when they're trying to, I guess, protect you or whatever in their mind they think they're doing, they have good intentions.
mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that it's okay for you to not do what you're supposed to do because they don't feel that. You still have to move forward and see what happens in this relationship. And one of the other points was like, even when that transition happens, you have to be confident that your relationship is strong enough to where even if we separate for a while, it is a possibility that we can still reconcile or we can still be friends on a different level. It may
True.
not be like we were talking exactly how it was, but we can still be friends. We can still love each other, still have a respectable relationship with each other. So,
Very true.
yeah.
And those things require spiritual and natural maturity that
Mhm.
sometimes we do not always exhibit.
Yeah, it takes time though.
True.
It takes time because they, like I said, they just can't see it. They can't see what God told you when you were praying or when you were fasting or when you were seeking Him. They weren't there when God told you to do dot dot dot, or when you've been inspired to do something. So they don't mean to be mean. They just don't see it.
And you have to have patience. And again, that's all a part of when you're talking about dealing with what is. It's just as critical for both parties to exhibit patience, love,
Mm-hmm.
respect for one another, to the point where, like you said, if we cannot see eye to eye, can we amicably split and depart?
Mm-hmm.
You know, still having that same love for each other. And if there was a time of need, we could still come together and support one another.
Right.
But we just have a differing of views and opinions at this time.
Yeah. And it can happen.
True.
It has happened there's some stories in the Bible that talk about people having to split.
Yeah.
Sometimes they didn't get back together because it wasn't meant to be. Some relationships really you have to walk away from.
And they were only for a season.
It can happen.
And again, when you respect where you are and what your new normal is, you will understand that when it's time to walk away and stop trying to pull, certain things, people from your past and trying to hold on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have to let some stuff just go.
Yeah.
Like I say, Paul was talking about forgetting those things which are behind me. He was talking more about his religion, and his teaching and training. But it still was one of those things where it wasn't conducive to where he was, for where he is, or in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Where he was, there had to be a transformation. Did he come back to it? Yes, with
Yeah.
greater level of understanding, and then he was able to use his knowledge to be able to help teach us, the right way, and be able to break it down and bring out the principles, of the Old Testament in a way that was not able to be done by others.
Right.
But for a moment there,
Mm-hmm.
you had to let that stuff go.
Yeah. It's so true.
And that's how we are sometimes with certain,
Yeah.
relationships. We just have to let some things go for a while.
Yeah.
And when they're ready and when you're ready, now bring it back and come back and be reconciled.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, you can't do it. Certain relationships, like you say, your wife and your
No.
kids and stuff, you just gotta,
Yeah.
you gotta dig in.
That's right. True. That's true.
Like I say, it's sometimes the easy thing to just, I'm disown them,
Away. Yeah.
walk away.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes because of the closeness of those relationships is more damaging, than good for you to just walk away.
Right.
Some you just gotta take the time, pull them up, dig in,
Yeah.
and really, with humility,
Yeah.
deal with the situation.
Yeah. Because relationships, they are very important. You can make them good or bad. That's really up to us.
True. And a lot of times I'm talking about me. We're sometimes just lazy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just easier to just let things be what they are and to hold on whatever it was in the past than it is to really take the time necessary for you to really understand where you are right now and then move forward.
Mm-hmm.
It just takes work
Right.
that we just are not always willing to put in because we just take it for granted.
Yeah.
Oh, she gonna be there. Oh, he gonna be there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're just my kids,
Yeah.
And those are the worst things that you can say
Yeah.
because that's demonstrating or you're vocalizing a lack of willingness to put forth an effort
Yeah.
to really make that relationship more enriched.
Yeah. And I think about one of our greatest relationships is the relationship that we have with God.
True.
Like the effort that we put into that. God doesn't change. It's us. And he's going to always be there. Yeah.
Well, he was talking about what would you let, or what things would you allow to separate you from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the different circumstances and situations that we go through life that if we're not careful can cause us to drift away and cause us to change our view and opinion and thoughts towards God. His doesn't change towards us, but ours do. And we have to come to a certain level of spiritual maturity to understand that he still loves us. He cares about us, even though we go through things, even though, everything isn't always the way we expect it to be. He still has our best interests at heart.
Yeah.
And if we don't, then we will find ourselves operating in a outdated model.
Yeah.
It's because even your relationship with God has to grow. It has to evolve.
Yeah, because I guess when you first get saved, how you see God as some, it's like it's all brand new and lovey-dovey, mushy, and everything. You see Jesus in the coffee cup and crosses everywhere. And, as time goes on, life goes on, the relationship, it can kind of, if you don't grow and evolve and life gets hard, you won't get through your problems as good as you could, because you see God as how you saw him when you first got saved, and you think everything's just going to be easy, and you have super spiritual days every day, and you hear from the Lord like he spoke to Moses on the mountain, and it's not always that way. So,
and you'll get bitter.
Yeah, you get all babyish and immature.
Yep. And every 5 minutes you want to give up or turn.
Yeah, because it's not like it was when I first got saved.
Correct. And it's really because you didn't evolve.
Yeah.
You didn't grow.
Yeah.
And his relationship is such that, you start off, one way and nurturing and, caring and loving and protective. And he's still all those things. But he's intending to empower you through the power of the Holy Ghost and through faith in his word and faith in him to be able to take on more. I say the joy of the Lord is your strength. It's not the joy of the Lord, is your strength. No, he gets joy out of you exhibiting strength of character, strength in your faith, and your confidence and your trust in him, because those are the things that he is expecting for you expecting to evolve in you and to grow in you over time.
Right.
And if you still have an immature faith and you're further down the line and you start going through, situations, you're going to have trouble.
Right.
And you're going to find yourself wanting to separate. And it's because you don't understand what was versus where we are and what is.
Right.
Like I say, God is still God no matter what time. Like I say, he's consistent.
Right.
Very consistent. But the inconsistency comes in how we see God and how we choose to approach God and how we believe in God. And he's trying to bring us to a level of consistency so that we, can have that same testimony.
Right. So true. Man, I love this topic. It's relationships. We could talk about this all day.
But we're not.
But anyway, get the book. It's called The People Factor by Van Moody. It has a lot of good stuff in there.
Yep. And get the book. It's called The Bible. Read it.
It has a lot of good stuff in there.
About relationships.
Oh, yeah. Well, this kind of just helps enhance some stuff, too. It is biblically. It's a pastor. Van Moody is a pastor.
I know.
Well, that's our time. Thank you so much for listening. We hope this episode has further enriched your perspective.
Until next time, I'm Mike.
And I'm Talisha. God bless.